Welcome to A Place for Film, the IU Cinema podcast. On this week's episode, we're talking about road comics. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Andy Hunsucker.
And I'm Jason Thompson.
And on this week's episode, we have a producer of the film Road Comics, Big Work on Small Stages, Susan Sizer, with us.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us. So let's talk about this film. Yeah. Road Comics, Big Work on Small Stages, roadcomicsmovie.com. This is going to be playing at the cinema on September 30th. Mm-hmm. That's a Sunday, I believe. Mm-hmm. And Jason, you and I got to see this.
We did.
Now, I'm a fan of stand-up comedy.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a big fan of stand-up comedy.
Great.
And in fact, I really pride myself on kind of knowing comics that other people don't know about, you know? I've never heard of any of these people, though. So I'm very interested. I was very interested to kind of see these people because your movie really focuses on an idea that not a lot of people think about, which is that not all comedians are not all of them have, like an album or a DVD mm-hmm. or, a sitcom in the works. Some of them just do it because they love doing it. Mm-hmm. So where did you find these people? What drew you to the project, and how did this all come together?
Great. Thank you for asking about that. And I'm glad that you started out by telling that you are a fan and you didn't know any of these people. I moved to Bloomington to work here in 2006. Mm-hmm. And I was already interested in comedy because I had studied in South India, a comedic theater tradition. And that sort of raised my ethnographic antennae, if you will, about how comedy can be such a good site for discussing and critiquing and laughing at culture. Mm-hmm. Okay, so humor is a good site for the study of culture. That's kind of what I ran with in my first book on South Indian theater. And then I was kind of casting around for, well, what might be here around us that fulfills that same need. And I just attended, stand-up comedy night at Bear's Place, which used to be every Monday night and every Saturday night. Mm-hmm. That ended in 2011. But when I came in 2006, 2007, I came and I just started seeing people who I'd never heard of. Mm-hmm. And I got interested in, well, who are these people? Mm-hmm. They're road comics. They're people who play the region that they can drive to. And you don't see them on TV. They're not based in LA or New York. They haven't been discovered. They're not on Last Comic Standing, but they are performing for local audiences all around the Midwest and South Central states regions every night of the week in different places. And so we had here in Bear's Place, we had a bar that was on that circuit. Yeah. Mm. And it was booked by a guy in Louisville, Kentucky, who ran a club called the Comedy Caravan. Mm-hmm. His name is Tom Sobel, and he features in the film. Mm-hmm. He booked Bear's Place for 27 years until that ended in 2011. And we do still have another comedy club now here in Bloomington that's very active and brings a lot of good people, the Comedy Attic. It's a different scene than what that Bear's Place scene was. Yeah. At the Comedy Attic, you can pay up to $20 a ticket, and there's a 2-item minimum, and you see people whose names you're familiar with from their film or movie credits, usually writers or they've been featured in films themselves. At Bear's Place, it was a $5 cover and no minimum. Yeah. And so it brought a really different crowd. A lot of people from Bedford were regulars there, and students. Mm-hmm. And, there were shows. I think there was an 8 o'clock at 10 o'clock, and sometimes to midnight
The
show.
later shows always got more interesting as more people drank in.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you were there.
I was a commoner there for many years. Yeah.
Okay.
I saw my fair share of comedians come through. Yeah.
Yeah. So you may have seen these.
I've seen Tim before, and I want to say I've seen Stewart, but I'm not 100%. A lot of his stuff seemed familiar, but it might have just been...
He changes. He's very prolific, so his stories and jokes change a lot. But anyway, that's how I first encountered this phenomenon of road comedy and got interested in this. And I really wanted to pursue it further. Like how do they sustain themselves? This is clearly a labor of love, because they're on the road all the time. 45 weeks out of the year. It's very hard to maintain a family or a relationship even. They have no insurance. No one's paying for them in any way. It's a very old-fashioned, in a way, job to drive yourself to a gig and write all your own material and wear your own clothes and book your own hotels. It's a very, in this age of everything sort of virtual and digital, these people are really working on the ground. And that interested me.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of a door-to-door salesman a little bit.
Yeah.
Sort of that mentality that you're hitting the ground, you're pounding the pavement.
That's right.
You're hoping for the right place, the right time. And that always seemed to interest me as well with these comedians, just watching them, like, oh, they're from here and here, and then they'll tell stories from where they're from.
Right.
But and then it was always interesting to see, like, especially people who were opening for other people, kind of what they did after they got off the stage. Like, what, some people got, real quiet, and then some people were, like, mingling with other people. It was always interesting to see. And it was almost always opposite of what they were doing on stage, which I thought was pretty interesting. And you get to that a little bit in the movie. Like, there's some of the, especially Kristen, she's kind of like that. I got that vibe where she's like, and she even says it, she's just like, I'm this completely different person on stage.
That's
and
right.
And then, when I'm away from all that, I'm just kind of...
She actually says, I don't know if I can use the language that they use.
Well,
we're radio clean, so
we're radio
not.
clean, probably
Yes.
not. Okay, yeah, there is language in this film.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, she says she's nice and polite off stage, but she's kind of a bitch. That I can use.
We'll let that go.
On stage. And people have watched, her stuff and said, "Oh, she's so mean." I'm like, no, she's free with her perceptions,
Right.
and she's honest. Anyway, I got so interested in the whole way that stand-up comedy opens up an avenue for people's creativity, and I really became interested in this kind of road comedy as a place where working class comics, because all of these comics, none of them have a college education. They're not the people that you find in LA and New York who are, who've learned all about it all through college, etc. These are real working class people who are performing for working class audiences for the most part.
Yeah.
But they are mastering this form that is so dialogic. It's so much about a dialogue with people. And when I say mastering it, it's really artful. They have practiced so much by getting to do a show every night, or sometimes 2 shows a night. That's what makes a good performer, is practice.
Yeah.
And so these guys get really good. And I chose 3 people out of that whole, the range of people who came through Bear's Place. I chose 3 comics that I thought were really interesting, creative, and different from each other, one from the other.
Yeah, and I think that's, Stewart, they've kind of talks about how he tells stories. He doesn't really tell joke, and so his bits get really long. And Tim is more of like kind of cerebral, kind of,
Yes.
and Kristen, I feel like she's more energetic a little bit. She has a more, I think Kristen, of all those 3 is sort of the more, what I would call like a standard stand-up comic, like most similar to what's popular right now. What I found interesting was all these people, it felt like they had kind of accepted, like, I'm never going to be a big star. Like, maybe they kind of secretly hope someday somebody will find them and they'll be a big star, but it felt like they had kind of had that dream and kind of let it go, because it was like, I'm doing what I love, and if I'm not ever, Stewart said it several times, you're never going to be on Letterman. And so, and Tim had been on Star Search. I think Kristen, it said she had been on Last Comic Standing briefly or something like that. But it felt like no matter what, they're still going to be doing this.
Right.
And that I found kind of interesting. Did you?
Yes, because it allows us to value something in the doing of it, not to become something beyond the doing of it, but to really be in it. And that I love. I love that about live performance, that we are here in this moment together. And this is what it's about, right? That we're going to value this, not preserving it or broadcasting it again or, not making it fit into somebody else's conception or larger picture, but making it an event.
Yeah.
So, I think that it's hard to be a performer and not harbor dreams of being discovered one day. Kristen actually lives out in L.A., and I think she would love to be discovered. But I think you're right that Stuart and Tim, they're not moving out to the coasts and doing showcase comedy. You know, but I love how deep they're going with their own work and into their own work. And I think audiences really appreciate it. I saw Stuart recently did the Indie Fringe Fest, which is more of a theater venue than his usual kind of the bar scene. And it was really interesting to see his material kind of as theater.
Yeah. Well, and I think speaking of, Stuart's material, it kind of reminds me a little bit of sort of like a Mike Birbiglia sort of thing, like a one-man show type thing. That's really what his and sort of seeing someone like Mike Birbiglia kind of become sort of this more well-known comic kind of makes me think that Stuart maybe has a chance if he sort of goes in the one-man show direction.
Yeah, his one-man show was brilliant.
Yeah,
and I think audiences really appreciate it. He's gone to this level of social critique that's become really interesting, and is really disturbing the bar crowds now. Like he just told me a story about playing a bar in the Ozarks. He has this new material where he kind of questions the motto of the United States, the "In God We Trust" motto. So he goes to get his license plate from a BMV, and the woman says, "Well, you could have your county name, or you could have 'In God We Trust.'" He says, "I think I'll take the county name." She goes, "Why don't you want 'In God We Trust'?" He says, "Ma'am, I have 4 airbags in my car." And I saw that motto when I was getting patted down at the airport by the security guards because it was right above me. And when the cop stops me because I'm not wearing a seatbelt, I said to him, "I trust in God." I think he would still write me the ticket. So he kind of gets at it in this very homey way.
Yeah.
But how much do we believe, in what we put out there?
Yeah.
And he really is starting to question, what kinds of contradictions are we living with between what we say and what we do, what we really believe and who we are. And those kind of really pushing it, questioning the cultural standards and cultural norms was really getting him in trouble in the Ozarks bar. And actually people threw full cans of beer at him.
Wow.
And threatened him after the show. So he's really sort of decided to go even more in the direction of, I'm going to do what I want.
Oh, yeah.
And because it matters to me and it'll matter to the people who I really want to think about it.
Yeah. And just about every stand-up comedian has a has a podcast now. And I listen to a lot of them to hear them talk about their process. And a lot of them sort of talk about that, like finding your voice and figuring out what you want to say is kind of more important than, how many people are laughing or, if you find your voice and you're saying something that's worth saying, people will find you. And sort of that's sort of what I'm hearing from them. So in the film, you spend a lot of time sort of discussing process with a lot of the comedians. What struck you about their processes that were different or similar? Were there any sort of traits about them that sort of like, okay, this is what makes them want to be a stand-up comic, or was it all just totally different?
Well, interestingly, they all kind of had the same story about, being scared to death to get up on stage but wanting to do it, doing it, bombing, but then dropping out of college the next day, right? They had started, 2 of them had started college, Tim hadn't, but selling all their possessions and living for comedy, right? Like something about it so appealed to them that they were willing to give everything else up. That fascinates me.
Yeah.
They just wanted to keep working at it because I think, like I was trying to say, it opens up an avenue, for this way of getting to understand what you want to say or what you feel by doing it in a dialogue with an audience. Because you have to do stand-up live, right? You have to do it for an audience.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist unless it's a communicative thing. You can't practice it without an audience.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Jason, you and I went to a stand-up show with Michael Ian Black and Michael Showalter, who are sort of better-known comedians. But it was amazing because they got up on stage, and about halfway through the show, they admitted they had no idea what they were going to do when they got up on that stage. And they were like, yeah, we sort of had an idea that, we'd introduce ourselves, and then one of us would do our hour, the other one would do his hour, then we'd be done. But they literally just stood up on stage for the entire hour and 45 minutes or whatever and just tried to make each other laugh. And just doing that just made us laugh. And it really felt like they created something on that stage that night that it will never be duplicated. Like even if they found, even if they had the exact same words, it was the exact same audience, you can't redo that ever again. I think that's what I love about stand-up comedy. It's like it'll never be exactly the same. And granted, most of the comedy I listen to is on albums where it will always be the same every time. But you pick up things and you think about, well, what if they'd said this a little differently? And then sometimes you hear an older version of the bit and then a newer version of the bit, and you notice the differences. But all that is really fascinating. So how long exactly did you follow people around for?
Well, I started in 2007, but really started following them in 2008. And we shot most of the footage in 2008, 2009, and 2010. So, 3 years, but I haven't really stopped. So the footage is kind of from then, 2009. And a lot of things have happened. Like I mentioned, Bear's Place is closed.
Yeah.
And new comedy club has opened, and the comics have gotten older, and but I think that this is a good record of documenting this phenomenon, and I could go more deeply into it, and I plan to do that in the book that I'm going to write to support. The film will support the book.
Yeah.
Hopefully interest people in asking some deeper questions about how you become a real masterful stand-up comic and what happens in that exchange.
Yeah. So you also talk in the film a lot about how comedy clubs sort of had a big boom and then were sort of declining. Do you have a sense of where that's at right now? Is it still declining or is it steady?
I think it's still declining, unfortunately. The comedy clubs have fewer nights now. So it used to be like Wednesday through Sunday, and now it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And I don't know if that's just still an effect of the recession, that people have less disposable income, or that there are more options for what they do with their entertainment money. But I think that clubs are still closing, and bars are maybe doing something different. So yeah, it's a hard market out there.
And you talked about the one booker, but you talked to several other bookers.
Right.
How did you connect with all of them?
Well, Stuart is from Georgia, and he started what he considers his home club is the Punchline Comedy Club in Atlanta, Georgia. So I went down there to see his home club, and I met the owner and booker for that club, Chris DePetta, and he features in the film too. And then Tim went on an audition. What was it for, actually? It was held in Columbus, Ohio at the Funny Bone. And I think, was it for a Comedy Central thing? I can't remember now. But at that audition, I met the owner and booker for that club in Columbus, Ohio, and we talked to him. And these people, they play an important role in the comics' lives because comics have to have a relation. Like I said, it's very old-fashioned in that way. They have to, they call, is there any room? in your club, or do you have any bookings for me? I'm going to be near Cleveland on the weeks of, second and third week of October. And they try and fill up their schedule, right? So they're really always having to talk with bookers. And the bookers are, steer club owners to good comics, the comics they like, right? And so that gets very political. And it's important, really important for the comics that they have a community of comics who know each other and can support each other and say, hey, okay, I'm going to be doing this gig. Why don't you open for me? Right? And start to get people on the circuit, right? So there's a whole sort of subcultural network of comics who know each other and really help each other come up in this world through the ranks.
Another thing that I found interesting was, sort of the business behind a comedy club that was talked about a little bit, and how it's basically treated like kind of a bar, that this is the thing that gets people to come and drink there. I mean, do you think that's just the way it is? Does it have to be that way? I don't
think it does have to be that way at all. And what is his name? Reagan. What's his first? Brian Regan.
Oh, okay.
He was a comic that all of these comics mentioned as someone who's managed to get outside of bars to actually do just stand-up comedy in a theater. People would come, not as big as Steve Martin was in, the 70s, but that to be able to do a stand-up act and not have to be selling whiskey, not having, that you are the entertainment while people eat dinner or while they drink. So I think they all would like that. And I don't think it needs to be that way. It's just that there are some very interesting ways that a bar is like an after-hours venue and place and space in our culture that reads as off the record. And so that everyone who's there it's a leisure time activity, and anything that gets said there is off the record. And that actually is very liberating for people. And it sets the tone for the way that stand-up comedy communicates, right? Which is to say, I'm going to talk to you now off the record, what I really want to say and what you don't get to say during your day job.
Yeah.
Right. And that's something that I like to analyze, all the aspects of that, all the features of that. Why, for example, obscenity is important in stand-up, because that communicates the same feeling. We're going to talk now really truthfully, the way we really feel. And we're going to use swear words if we need to communicate that feeling, that effect, right? And that people dress really casually, and they're drinking, and they don't have their kids with them.
Yeah.
Right. So all those things, I think, are part of what make the bars a good home for how stand-up has developed.
Yeah.
The aesthetic of it.
Yeah. All right. Well, this film is going to be playing at the IU Cinema on Sunday, September 30th at 6:30 p.m. Tickets are free, so you can get in and check that out. Really enjoyed the film a lot.
Thank you.
Did you have any final thoughts about the film that you wanted to share?
I just want people to know that it is funny.
Yes.
Like you actually get to hear the comics.
Yes.
It's not just me, talking about how great they are, but you actually get to hear some of their humor.
And as a fan of stand-up comedy, I can tell you these people are very funny.
Oh, yeah.
Great.
I think Tim has one of the best jokes I've ever heard constructed about how he's an African American.
Yeah.
And that it just goes on a run. I won't spoil it for you. You should really see it, but it's just a brilliant bit. Oh, it's so funny.
Yeah, I personally enjoyed Stewart's shower story. That was actually real.
Yeah.
Like that is just a real story, and I was laughing the whole time just because I can just only imagine the scenario that like the point in his life where he had to be, and it's so like such a low point, but he's made it such a high. Funny thing to talk about, and I that's the kind of comedy that I really appreciate. It's just like, okay, I've been in a very dark place in my life. Now let me make fun of it. Self-deprecation is really high on my list of if you can pull that off and make me laugh, I'm good to go. I will say one thing is the editing is really well done in this movie. I really enjoyed that, especially sort of the construction of a joke. And I think you did that with Stewart. You just sort of flashed between him doing the same joke, but in like 5 different places, and then sort of going between the comics was a really smooth thing. You don't spend all your time with one and then another and another. You kind of go back and forth between the two, and I really appreciated that because it flowed really well and it didn't sort of bog down the movie at all. So that's not a question, I guess, more of a praise. So that's one thing that I really latched onto in the movie was that sort of it just flowed really well, and each comic had their own unique thing to say about what the main topic was at the time of that point in the movie. So I really enjoy it, and so thank you. By the way, I think it's a really good insight into the behind the scenes of what what you see is not necessarily what you get, but there's a process there, which is obviously these people are artists.
Yeah,
and that's the big thing.
And that's the thing that's kind of brilliant about Stewart. When you watch him on stage, it kind of seems like this is the first time he's ever told anyone this. Like he's just sitting he could be doing the same thing anywhere in the world, and this could have happened to him this morning, but it's not. He's really worked on this, and he talks about his process of how, is it true? Right. Maybe.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, that quality of making something real and seem immediate when it's actually scripted. And that's part of the informal dynamic that I'm talking about that bars help.
Yeah.
Is that you are actually communicating. Every time he tells that story, he's telling it to those people.
Yeah.
Right? And that's an amazing thing. But he also has perfected it and knows what lines audiences are going to laugh at.
Yeah.
And he reads the audience so carefully before setting out to tell a joke.
Well, and Tim has a joke that's completely that way. The owl joke is completely set up that way. Like he has, like, if someone responds the way he wants them to respond, he's going to run with it. And if they don't, the joke still works, but he just is clearly going to have to take it another direction. So it's really interesting to see the construction of the joke and what works and what doesn't work. And I'm sure, depending on which region you go to, you gotta be flexible with that.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Well, we'll get out of here then. Thank you again, Susan, so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed the film. Road Comics, big work on small stages. Roadcomicsmovie.com. There's a nice long trailer there. You get a chunk of the film to sort of see where it's going and sort of get to know the people in it a little bit, which is really nice. So we'll get out of here. Thank you guys for listening. I'm Andy.
And I'm Jason.
This has been, and always will be, A Place for Film. A Place for Film is recorded at WFIU Studios in Bloomington, Indiana.